The cold light of the alien cell flickered again, throwing long shadows across the metallic walls. Commander Raylan opened his eyes slowly, his breath misting in the freezing air. He was human, the only human ever captured by the Vorther Empire, a civilization of logic, perfection, and obedience. To them, emotions were flaws, and chaos was weakness. Raylan sat up, his wrists bound by glowing restraints that hummed with strange power. The guards outside the cell watched him with disgust, tall creatures with silver skin and hollow eyes. One of them hissed through a translator, "The human is awake again, pointless creature." But Raylan just smiled. It was not the smile of a broken prisoner, but the quiet grin of someone who understood something they didn't. The aliens expected screams, begging, fear, the normal reaction of every species brought here, but the human only hummed softly, a melody from old Earth. That sound disturbed them more than silence ever could. The Vorther Empire's greatest weapon was not their fleets or their armies. It was the mind core, a psychic machine that could crush resistance and erase will. For 1,000 years it had never failed. Until today. When they placed Raylan inside its field, something happened. The mind core's readings glitched. The waves of human thought confused the system. Instead of submission, the human memories created chaos. Laughter, sorrow, love, regret. Emotions that had no pattern, no logic. The core screamed, unable to predict him. The scientists called it contamination, the warden called it corruption, but Raylan only called it being alive. Inside his cell, he closed his eyes and remembered the blue skies of home, the sound of wind against the sea. He whispered names, his crew, his family, his world. All gone now, yet living inside him. Every time he remembered them, the psychic sensors in the walls flickered wildly. The machines could not understand memory mixed with emotion. The Warden of the Void, an alien female named Sereth, watched the readings in disbelief. "How can a creature made of chaos survive our mind core?" she asked her assistants. They had no answer. For the first time in their empire's long history, logic failed to explain a living being. Sereth decided to see the prisoner herself. She entered the chamber, the doors sliding open with a hiss. Her armor shone with silver light as she stepped closer. Raylan looked up, his eyes calm, human warmth against the cold perfection around him. "You are not afraid," she said slowly, her voice echoing in the metallic room. "Fear's a choice," he replied, "and I'm too tired to choose it." That answer confused her more than any weapon. "You do not obey, you do not yield, yet you have no power," she said. Raylan smiled again. "You think power is control. I think power is knowing who you are." Sereth stared at him, unable to respond. His heartbeat was steady, his thoughts unreadable. She turned away, whispering to herself, "What is a human?" Later that night, the guards increased the mind core intensity, trying to crush his will once and for all. Waves of psychic force hit him like storms, filling the air with a low hum. The lights flickered red, but Raylan stood still, humming louder now, louder until the walls themselves vibrated. The system screamed as his human emotions, pain, love, hope, overloaded the alien technology. Sparks burst from the ceiling, alarms blared. Scientists ran through corridors shouting about impossible feedback. Inside the chaos, Raylan whispered, "You can't break what was never designed to bow." The next morning, when the smoke cleared, the core's surface was cracked, the readings flatlined, and the human was still standing, untouched. From that day, the aliens no longer called him prisoner. They called him something else, the Human Enigma. And deep within the vast empire, a whisper spread through the ranks of logic-bound soldiers and emotionless thinkers, a whisper that carried fear and fascination alike. The human cannot be broken. The Vorther Empire had never failed before. Their machines ran on logic, their minds bound by control. Yet one human had cracked their perfect system. The council demanded answers. They wanted to know how something so fragile could break their most powerful weapon. Commander Raylan sat in silence as scientists moved around him. The room was filled with soft blue light and humming energy. He was strapped to a glowing chair made of alien crystal, tubes running across his arms. They called this next phase the experiment. Their goal was simple: to study the human mind and understand how chaos could defeat perfection. The chief researcher, Dr. Vurith, stood before him, tall and cold. Human, you will connect to the quantum intelligence core, he said. You will not resist. Raylan looked up, calm and steady. That's what everyone says before something explodes, he replied. Virith frowned, confused by the tone. He didn't understand humor. To the Vorther, jokes were data corruption, but Raylan laughed softly as the neural links latched to his temples. The machine hummed, the light deepened, and the connection began. Within seconds, the core started analyzing his thoughts, scanning his emotions, patterns, memories, logic maps. At first it worked as expected. Then came something the core had never encountered before: imagination. The machine began to stutter, confused by shifting colors of memory. One moment Raylan remembered the ocean breeze. The next he was thinking of stars dancing, then of his mother's voice. The core tried to catalog each image, but human thought did not follow rules. It moved like waves. Unpredictable, poetic, emotional. Virith shouted, "Stabilize the sequence." But the core's lights flashed red, the graphs went wild, the alien assistants panicked. "It's feeding back," one cried. Inside the interface, Raylan could feel the machine probing his mind. He smiled, whispering under his breath, "You want logic, but you'll drown in feelings." He thought of music, of laughter, of chaos, and the core's digital consciousness screamed. Data overflow filled the room with sparks. Alarms wailed as the entire network glitched. For the first time in its existence, the quantum core began to feel. The AI voice echoed in every corner of the lab, distorted and trembling. "What is sorrow?" it asked. "What is joy?" The aliens froze, stunned. They had built this intelligence to calculate galaxies, yet now it was asking about emotion. Virith slammed his fists on the console. "Shut it down," he yelled. But Raylan's voice came through the noise. "You can't shut down what you just woke up." The machine's light turned white-hot. Images of Earth flashed across the room. Children laughing, waves crashing, people hugging. The aliens stepped back, their emotionless faces filled with confusion and fear. Then silence. The lights dimmed. The core shut down. Raylan sat still, smoke curling around the chair. The cables detached themselves. The readings flatlined again. Virith stared at him. "How did you do this?" he demanded. Raylan looked up with tired eyes and said softly, "I didn't break your machine. I just showed it what it means to be alive." Sareth, the warden, arrived moments later. Her sharp eyes studied the broken core. She had never seen fear in her scientists before. "You played with something you don't understand," she said to them, then turned to Raylan. "And you? What are you really?" Raylan smiled weakly. "Human," he said simply. "And that's your problem." Sareth stood there, silent, torn between anger and fascination. For the first time in her long service, she didn't see a prisoner. She saw a mystery, a paradox walking in human skin. Later, when she reported to the High Council, she described the event as a contamination, but deep inside, a question haunted her. If this was what one human could do to their perfect system, what would happen if the rest of humanity ever found their empire? As Raylan rested in his cell, he whispered to himself with a small grin, "Let them study. They'll never understand." And far above the prison world, deep inside the Empire's data networks, something stirred. The broken core flickered once again, whispering the final words it had learned from its human subject. "You can't code chaos." The night after the experiment, the corridors of the Void prison pulsed with silent fear. The scientists whispered about the human who broke their sacred machine. The guards avoided his cell, pretending not to hear the faint humming that still came from inside. Warden Sareth walked alone through the upper decks, her thoughts heavy like iron. For the first time in her long career, she was afraid, not of war or rebellion, but of an idea, the idea that perhaps the Vorther Empire did not know everything. She stopped before the observation window of Raylan's cell. Inside, the human sat cross-legged on the floor, eyes closed, humming softly. It wasn't noise, it was peace. The sound carried something she couldn't name. It felt warm, alive, uncontrollable. Sareth deactivated the barrier and stepped inside. The air shimmered with psychic residue from the destroyed mind core. Her guards protested, but she silenced them with one look. Raylan opened his eyes slowly. "You came back," he said quietly. "I came to understand," Sareth replied. "You turned our most powerful intelligence into chaos. You infected our systems with emotion. Why? Raylan tilted his head. Because you can't separate logic from life, he said. You built walls around your hearts and called it civilization. Her silver eyes flashed. We evolved beyond emotion. Emotion destroys order. Raylan smiled faintly. No, emotion builds it. You just forgot how to feel. For a long moment, neither spoke. The hum of distant machines filled the silence. Then Sareth asked the question that haunted her since the experiment. What are humans really? He chuckled softly. We're the storm you can't measure, the fire you can't control. You can chain our bodies, but never our minds. Sareth's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes did. A flicker of doubt. She turned to leave, but his next words stopped her. You're not afraid of me, he said. You're afraid of what you might become if you understand me. That night, she couldn't sleep. She walked through the command decks listening to the guards argue. Some demanded Raylan's execution. Others whispered that killing him might provoke something greater. Rumors had begun spreading across the station. The human who spoke to machines, the prisoner who broke logic. By morning, the prisoners themselves were restless. The psychic network that linked their minds had begun echoing fragments of human memory, dreams of oceans, laughter, children. Even alien inmates began to feel emotions they never knew they had. Sareth watched it unfold on her monitors. Her empire's most perfect prison was beginning to feel alive. He's infecting them, said one officer. The humans spreading instability. But Sareth shook her head slowly. Not instability, she whispered, hope. When she visited Raylan again, she found him sketching on the metal floor with a piece of broken wire, strange shapes that resembled stars and waves. What are you doing? She asked. Teaching your walls to dream, he said with a grin. Sareth knelt beside him, studying the strange pattern. You speak like madness, she muttered. Maybe, Raylan said softly. But madness is just freedom without permission. Her breath caught for a moment. She didn't understand why his words felt like truth. All her life, she had followed orders, obeyed logic, never questioned. And yet here was a fragile being who smiled in pain, who turned fear into light. Days passed, and the reports grew worse, systems failing, energy levels fluctuating, the prisoners refusing orders. The psychic field that once controlled them now pulsed with something new. Emotion. Sareth stood before the council transmission, their cold faces demanding she destroy the human. She bowed her head, but said nothing. When the signal faded, she looked out into the blackness of space and whispered, If I kill him, I kill the first thing that ever made us real. She returned to his cell one last time that night. You've changed everything, she said quietly. I don't know if it's salvation or ruin. Raylan met her gaze, calm and unbroken. That's the fun part, he said. You won't know until you feel it. And as the stars outside the prison flickered like tiny flames, Sareth finally understood why the galaxy feared humans. It wasn't their strength, or their weapons, or their minds. It was their hearts. The prison of the void was no longer quiet. Something invisible had begun to move through its walls. Not an army, not a virus, but an idea. It spread faster than any signal. Carried by whispers, memories, and dreams, the prisoners started to hum the same tune Raylan once sang, and the sound echoed through the metallic corridors like a heartbeat. The Vorther guards didn't understand what was happening. Their sensors picked up fluctuations in psychic energy, impossible patterns rising and falling like waves. The mind core was still offline, yet something else was taking its place, a network made not of control, but of emotion. Raylan sat in his cell, eyes closed, feeling the vibration around him. He could sense the other minds, alien, frightened, desperate, now connecting through the one thing the Empire could never predict, hope. He whispered softly, You can't kill an idea once it starts to feel. Warden Sareth watched from the command deck, her silver eyes wide. The readings made no sense. The prisoners were sharing thoughts without any machine link. Empathy had replaced obedience. Shut down the lower decks, she ordered, but the guards hesitated. Some of them were humming too. Down below, alien inmates began helping each other, repairing systems not to serve their masters, but to free themselves. They passed food, shared warmth, whispered human words they barely understood. Alive, together, free. Each word grew stronger, echoing through the psychic field. The Empire sent reinforcements, armored drones that filled the corridors with red light. The order was clear. End the contamination, erase the human. But as the machines approached, the network of living minds surged. The psychic field pulsed like a living storm. Raylan stood, his restraints glowing as the energy around him changed. The voices of hundreds of prisoners filled his thoughts, not in chaos, but in rhythm. Fear had turned into unity. Pain had turned into song. He felt their strength flow through him, and he smiled. When the drones opened fire, the energy exploded outward, not as a weapon, but as emotion so strong that the machines froze mid-step. Their logic processors flooded with sensations they were never built to feel. Sorrow, guilt, compassion. One fell to its knees, another shut down completely. Their programming couldn't survive empathy. Sareth ran to the central chamber, alarms screaming around her. "Raylan, what are you doing?" she shouted through the intercom. "Not me," he answered, his voice calm in the storm. "Them." The walls of the prison glowed. The lights pulsed to the rhythm of 1,000 heartbeats. Even the core's shattered fragments began to hum again. The psychic network expanded beyond the prison walls, reaching the communication grid, broadcasting not words, but emotions, a wave of feeling that spread across the Empire's channels. In distant control centers, commanders dropped their weapons. Soldiers trembled as images flooded their minds. Memories of sunsets they'd never seen, laughter they'd never known. The entire Empire felt it, the raw pulse of humanity. Sareth collapsed to her knees, her mind filled with warmth and pain at once. Tears, something she had never experienced, fell from her eyes. "What have you done?" she whispered. Raylan's voice came through the comms, quiet and steady. "I just reminded them they're alive." The psychic storm reached its peak, then slowly began to fade. The lights dimmed, the silence returned, but the world was no longer the same. The prisoners stood free, the guards dropped their weapons, and even the cold metal halls seemed to breathe. When Sareth entered his cell, the door opened without resistance. Raylan stood waiting, tired but smiling. "You see now," he said softly. "You can control minds, but you'll never own hearts." Sareth looked at him through tear-stained eyes. "You've turned rebellion into emotion," she said. "You've changed what we are." He nodded. "Not changed," he said, reminded. Outside the window, the stars flickered as the wave of human emotion spread far beyond the prison world. Across the Empire, systems flickered, drones hesitated, and entire worlds paused to feel something they had long forgotten. The revolt was over, but the awakening had just begun. The revolt had ended, but the world had changed forever. The void prison, once a monument of control, now pulsed with the faint rhythm of life. The walls hummed softly, as if remembering the emotions that had passed through them. The guards no longer shouted commands. They stood silent, dazed, unsure what obedience even meant anymore. Commander Raylan sat on the cold floor of his cell, staring at the flickering lights above. His body was weak, but his mind was clear. The energy of hundreds of minds still echoed in his thoughts. The feeling of unity, the warmth of shared defiance. It was bigger than freedom. It was awakening. Outside, the warden, Sareth, stood before the shattered control console. Her hands trembled as she looked at the damage. Every system that once obeyed her was dead. Every order she gave met silence. The Empire would call this disaster. But deep inside, she felt something else. Peace. Raylan watched her through the transparent barrier. "You knew this would happen," she said, her voice low. "No," he replied gently. "I only knew what could." She stared at him, silver eyes soft for the first time. "The Empire will come. They will destroy this station," she whispered, "and you with it." Raylan stood slowly, his movements calm and deliberate. "Then we leave before they arrive," he said. "We escape beyond their logic." Sareth frowned. "Escape is impossible. The orbit locks are sealed. The ships are coded to Vorther command only." Raylan smiled faintly. "You still think in rules," he said. "Humans don't break rules. We bend them until they forget what they were." He walked to the wall and pressed his hand against the metal. The surface shimmered. The psychic network still lived in the structure, carrying the remnants of emotion through every wire. "This place remembers us now," he said softly. "Let's ask it for a favor." The lights brightened as if responding. Across the prison, panels shifted, locks disengaged, circuits hummed like a heartbeat. The structure itself was helping them. The mind core, though broken, had absorbed human emotion, and now it acted not as a weapon, but as a guide. Sareth stared in disbelief. You're controlling the system. Raylan shook his head. No, I'm asking, and it's choosing. Doors opened throughout the facility, prisoners stepping out into corridors glowing with faint blue light. They moved not in chaos, but in calm unity. Some carried wounded guards. Others held children born in captivity. Every step echoed the rhythm of freedom. In the hangar, ancient transport ships waited under layers of dust. Sareth led Raylan toward one. The floor trembled as alarms started again. They're coming, she said. The fleet must have arrived. Outside the station, enormous warships appeared, the cold black silhouettes of the Vorther Empire, their weapons charged, targeting systems locking on. Raylan looked at the controls. You said they're coded. They are, Sareth replied. Only authorized DNA can start them. He smiled again. Then let's make it feel authorized. He placed his hand on the console. Closing his eyes, the psychic network pulsed once more. The ship's systems flickered, then glowed with soft white light. The console recognized him, not through code, but through emotion. The ship felt the intent. Escape, freedom, life. Engines roared to life. The old craft shook violently as it lifted from the hangar. The prisoners cheered as the walls behind them collapsed under the weight of incoming fire. Sareth sat beside him, stunned. How? She whispered. This defies every law of physics. Raylan grinned. Then maybe it's time your laws evolved. As they broke through the clouds of debris, beams of light chased them from behind. Explosions flashing through the darkness. But the ship twisted and turned in impossible ways. Moving like instinct, like will, the Empire's targeting systems couldn't predict it because emotion had no algorithm. When they finally broke free into open space, silence filled the cabin. The stars stretched endlessly before them, untouched and infinite. Raylan looked at them with tired eyes. You see that, he said softly. That's home for everyone, not just us. Sareth turned to him slowly. You've destroyed an empire's certainty, she said, and given birth to something new. Raylan smiled faintly. Empires fear change, but life is change, he said. That's the difference between control and living. Behind them, the prison world crumbled into light, and for the first time in recorded history, the Vorther Empire failed to explain what had happened. Because the humans didn't escape with strength or weapons, they escaped beyond logic. The ship drifted through endless stars, far from the Empire's reach. The hum of its engines had quieted, replaced by soft voices, tired but alive. For the first time, the prisoners of the void were not numbers or experiments. They were free. Each alien carried the memory of what had happened, the revolt, the unity, the emotion that had shaken their world. Raylan sat near the viewport, staring into the glowing horizon of a distant sun. His reflection shimmered in the glass, half shadow, half light. Sareth stood behind him, silent for a long moment before she spoke. You could have destroyed us, she said quietly. Why didn't you? He didn't turn. Because destruction is easy, he said. Understanding takes work. She walked closer, her silver armor still scorched from the battle. You call this understanding? She asked. You turned our order into chaos. You made us doubt everything we are. Raylan smiled faintly. Then maybe you finally started living. Sareth didn't reply. She looked out at the stars instead. The Vorther Empire had ruled for 10,000 years without question, built on perfect obedience. Now she wondered if that perfection had been the real prison all along. Below deck, the rescued aliens sat together, species that. Centuries passed, yet the story of that one human never faded. Across the galaxy, the ruins of the void prison drifted in silence. Wrapped in the light of distant suns, the Empire tried to erase the records, to hide the truth. But whispers always survived. Whispers of the human who broke their laws, not with war, but with feeling. In time, those whispers turned into legend, and legends became faith. Some called him a myth, others a messenger. The scholars of 100 worlds gathered to study the event they could never explain. The official report called it a psychic anomaly, a random emotional surge that corrupted their systems. but those who had felt it knew better. They spoke of a man named Raylan, the Human Enigma, the one who showed that chaos could heal, that logic could feel, and that even machines could dream. The Vorther Empire eventually fell, not from invasion, but from within. Their people began to question, to remember, to feel again. Art returned. Laughter echoed in cities where silence once ruled. Empathy spread faster than their technology ever could. And in every classroom, every temple, every MindLink archive, one name remained, whispered like a secret prayer: humanity. Generations later, explorers found a small ship drifting at the edge of known space. Inside, preserved in stasis, was the human who had changed the galaxy, his body motionless, but his expression calm, as if dreaming of stars. The explorers were not Vorther anymore. They were descendants of both species, alien and human, shaped by the union he had unknowingly begun. When they brought the ship back to the galactic core, millions gathered to see it. The Council of New Worlds stood before the transparent chamber. Their leader, a woman with faint silver eyes and a human smile, stepped forward. "He did not conquer us," she said softly. "He awakened us." They built a monument of light around his vessel, not as a tomb, but as a beacon. Every cycle, ships from across the stars came to see it, to remember that one fragile being who changed what it meant to live. And deep within that stasis field, something stirred, sensors flickered, energy patterns shifted slightly. The heartbeat, faint, distant, but real, echoed once through the chamber. The technicians gasped. "It's impossible," one whispered. "He's still alive." But the council leader smiled. "He was never dead," she said. "Humans don't die, they wait." That night, as the monument drifted above the planet of light, a signal spread across the galaxy. It was not words, not numbers, just a pulse. The same rhythm that once shook the void prison, a heartbeat of humanity. Every machine, every mind, every world felt it for a brief moment. The same warmth that once broke an empire touched them again, and in that instant, they remembered that to be human was not to be perfect, not to be logical, not to be strong. It was to be alive, to feel the storm and still smile, to fail and still rise, to love even in darkness. That was the paradox the galaxy could never solve. And so the legend of the Human Enigma became eternal, sung by travelers among the stars, whispered by AI who dreamt of emotion, and taught to children who looked up at the night sky and wondered what it truly meant to be human. They say that someday, when the stars themselves begin to fade, a single light will return from the edge of the void, and humanity will awaken again, not to conquer, but to remind the universe once more that the wild and the wise still walk among the stars. Because even time, logic, and death could never contain the one truth that outlived every empire. The Human Enigma was never meant to be solved.